Hello and welcome back to another episode of True Crimes with Richard Flopper. I'm your host, Richard Flopper, and just as a warning, this episode does involve graphic injury detail and violence involving minors, so viewer discretion is advised. Today, we're going back to January 1992 in Madison, Indiana, where a tragedy unfolded that shocked the nation. It involved four girls, jealousy, manipulation, and the brutal murder of a 12-year-old. This is Burned Innocence, the tragic death of Shanda Sharer. So before we get into the shocking details of today's story, let's speak a little bit about who Shanda was. She was 12 years old. She was sweet, funny, and full of life. She had recently moved to a new school, and she was adjusting like any other 12-year-old would, exploring new friendships, trying new clothes, learning who she was, basically. Life took a turn when she met Amanda Heathering, 14 years old, and a student at her school. The two formed a bond, possibly romantic in nature, which caught the attention of Amanda's ex-girlfriend, 16-year-old Melinda Lovelace. Melinda wasn't just jealous, she was furious. Melinda, already dealing with abuse and anger issues at home, became obsessed with Amanda. And that obsession turned dangerous once she saw Shanda as a threat. In the days leading up to the crime, Melinda began talking openly to friends about hurting Shanda. She expressed violent fantasies and plotted with three other girls. Laurie Tackett, age 17, known for being dark, unstable, and fascinated by the occult. Hope Rippey, 15, and Tony Lawrence, also 15. Quiet, unsure, but ultimately complicit. On the night of January the 10th, 1992, the four girls set their plan in motion. At around 11:30 p.m, the four girls arrived at Shanda's house. Melinda hid in the car, while Tony and Hope lured Shanda out under the pretense of going to see Amanda. Shanda was hesitant, but eventually agreed to go with them. After all, she was excited to see Amanda. That would be her final decision. Once in the car, they drove her to a remote location, an abandoned house known to Laurie. There, Melinda revealed herself. She began threatening Shanda, accusing her of stealing Amanda. The torment began slowly. Verbal abuse, intimidation, but it escalated quickly. They tied Shanda up. They beat her until she was virtually unrecognisable. Already humiliated enough, they then stripped her. They burned her with cigarettes, and then they shoved her into the trunk of the car. Still alive at this point. What must have been going through her head? The night dragged on. They drove around aimlessly. At one point, they stopped at Laurie's house, where they laughed, bragged, reenacted Shanda's screams for Laurie's parents. Hours passed. Eventually, around dawn, with her still alive in the boot of the car, they drove her to a remote field, doused her in gasoline, or petrol for the British. They stuffed her in a patch of brush and set her on fire. At that point, she was still alive. The horror didn't stop there. After returning home, the girls later went back to burn the body again, to make sure no one would recognise her. But she was found. The same morning, two hunters stumbled across what looked like a burnt mannequin, but it wasn't. It was Shanda. By the next day, the girl's guilt had begun to surface. Tony Lawrence, the most remorseful of the four, broke down and confessed everything to her parents, who immediately called the police. One by one, they were arrested. The nation was shocked. These were girls, teenagers, capable of such horrifying cruelty. They were tried as adults. In court, they were all found guilty of the murder of Shanda. Melinda Lovelace, 16 at the time, was given 60 years in prison and was paroled in 2019. Laurie Tackett, who was 17 years old at the time, was given 60 years in prison and paroled in 2018. Hope Rippey, who was 15 at the time, was given 35 years in prison and was paroled in 2006. Tony Lawrence, the most remorseful of the four, 15 at the time, was given 20 years in prison and paroled in 2000. None of them served their full sentence, and that fact remains painful for so many still to this day. Shanda's mother, Jacqueline Vault, has gone through every emotion imaginable: grief, rage, emptiness. But years later, she did something few could imagine. She forgave Melinda Lovelace and even partnered with her on a program that rehabilitates abused dogs. Her reasoning: hate only prolongs pain. And it's not closure for me, but it's peace. Shanda Sharer's story is a reminder of how quickly young lives can be shattered by pain, by jealousy, by manipulation. She was only 12 years old. She deserved love, safety, and the chance to grow up. Instead, her name now lives on, a solemn symbol of what happens when cruelty goes unchecked and when children are failed by everyone around them. Thank you for watching today's episode. And if you found today's episode powerful, please share it and consider donating to help fund youth programs to stop children falling into the traps of abuse at home and abuse elsewhere, which encourages them to act out and put that same rage onto other people. Shona wouldn't have died if the people that did it were checked as the minors they were. Stay safe and stay kind. And remember, Shanda Sharer, I've been your host, Richard Flopper. Peace.